Hey everyone, and welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're diving right into the science behind the upcoming 2026 El Niño and exactly how it's projected to impact Sri Lanka. But we aren't just looking at the weather. We're going to be looking at health systems, economics, and most importantly, how youth leadership can actually step up to turn climate vulnerability into resilience. So let's get started.
Now, before we even touch 2026, we've got to ask the most fundamental question. What exactly is ENSO? You probably hear this term thrown around a lot in climate discussions, but this single planetary cycle essentially dictates the weather for half the globe. To really understand our future, we have to ground ourselves in what this cycle actually does. Our roadmap today covers 5 key steps: the ENSO climate seesaw, measuring the ocean's fever, global impacts, the 2026 Sri Lanka forecast, and finally, the power of youth resilience.
All right, Section 1. The ENSO climate seesaw and understanding the global swing.
Imagine the air pressure across the tropical Pacific acting exactly like a giant playground seesaw, literally. Between Indonesia and the Central Pacific, there's this constant, natural atmospheric swing that's been happening for thousands of years, just pushing the climate back and forth across the globe. And when that seesaw tilts, the whole ocean shifts. During the warm El Niño phase, we get unusually warm water and weak trade winds. But flip that to La Niña, and you have strong trade winds pushing cool water across the ocean. When a body of water this massive changes temperature, it completely alters global weather patterns. It shifts where the rain falls and where droughts happen all over the world. So here's the crucial takeaway. El Niño isn't a permanent state. It's a temporary warming phase that typically lasts about 9 to 12 months, and it pops up every 2 to 7 years. It's just one piece of the 3-phase ENSO cycle: neutral, El Niño, and La Niña. Why does this matter to you? Well, because it's a cycle, we can track it, we can anticipate it, and most importantly, we can prepare for it. Moving right along to Section 2, measuring the ocean's fever, ONI versus RONI. Now, scientists don't just stick a toe in the water to guess if the ocean is warm. We actually measure sea surface temperature anomalies in a very specific equatorial box right in the middle of the Pacific. It's called the Niño 3.4 region, and it's roughly the size of Europe. If this specific global thermometer warms up enough, the alarm bells start ringing. This is where it gets really fascinating because the science has actually evolved. We used to rely entirely on the Oceanic Niño Index, or ONI. That just checked if that 3.4 region crossed a threshold of 0.5 degrees Celsius above normal. But here's the catch. Because of global warming, the entire ocean is heating up. So scientists shifted to RONI, the Relative Oceanic Niño Index. RONI subtracts the average tropical ocean temperature. It basically measures if Niño 3.4 is unusually warm compared to the rest of the globally warming tropics. It is a much more accurate way to measure the true El Niño signal today. When you look at the data, you'll see these intense red spikes. Those happen when the sustained relative warming crosses that adjusted 0.5 degree threshold for 5 consecutive overlapping 3-month periods. When the data stays in the red for that long, boom, an official El Niño is declared. And right now, the numbers are pointing us directly toward a major event. Okay, let's get into Section 3. Global impacts and extremes, or the cascade of effects. For a lot of regions, the most immediate, dangerous impact is public health. Warmer temperatures globally, combined with shifts in rainfall that leave behind more standing water, that is literally the perfect storm for mosquitoes. Because of this, El Niño heavily increases the expansion and transmission risk of infectious diseases like dengue, malaria, and cholera. And these impacts don't just exist in a vacuum. They're incredibly vast and deeply interconnected. We're talking extreme heat leading to heat stroke and fetal stress. We see major economic losses, sometimes in the trillions globally, just from supply chain disruptions, massive floods, and severe droughts. That extreme weather directly leads to crop failure and food insecurity. Plus, we absolutely cannot ignore the psychological toll. The anxiety, the stress from displacement, and the trauma after a huge disaster wrecks a community's livelihood is devastating. To tackle threats this massive, organizations like the World Health Organization rely on super complex, resilient operational frameworks. They actively map out climate-related hazards against vulnerability factors just to protect global populations. You can't just react to a flood after it happens. You need a resilient low-carbon health system already in place that can actually handle the sudden surge in patients from extreme heat or sudden disease outbreaks. Which brings us to Section 4,
the 2026 Sri Lanka forecast, a highly confident prediction.
Over 90%. Let that sink in for a second. That is the staggering probability of a moderate to strong El Niño event actively continuing right into early 2027. This isn't just a vague guess. This is a highly confident prediction from top climate scientists.
The official NOAA data paints a very clear picture. We're looking at an 80% chance right out of the gate in the June to August 2026 window, and it only climbs from there. This marks a remarkably high-confidence climate event. We have the data, we know it's coming.
So what does this actually mean on the ground for Sri Lanka? Well, it means gearing up for severe, localized disruptions. Sri Lanka is highly vulnerable and will likely see major shifts in seasonal rainfall. And this doesn't just mean a little more rain or a little less. It often means alternating periods of punishing dry spells, followed immediately by intense, heavy rainfall. And to complicate things further, you have the Indian Ocean Dipole, or IOD, a local climate pattern that interacts with El Niño. A positive IOD can dump massive amounts of rain on Sri Lanka, while a negative one dries it out. And with those crazy fluctuating water levels comes the highly amplified threat of severe dengue outbreaks.
Finally, Section 5, the power of youth resilience, going from victimhood to empowerment. Instead of facing this alone, youth leadership can really pioneer something called synergistic resilience. It sounds like a buzzword, but it's a super powerful concept. It's a dynamic, value-based approach where different systems, sectors, and communities team up. Young leaders can integrate efforts across human and natural systems to reduce risk collaboratively, rather than just trying to survive a climate disaster all by themselves.
1 + 1 = 3. This simple little equation hits the nail on the head for synergistic resilience. When youth, communities, local governments, and health systems all work together, the combined impact is vastly greater than the sum of its parts. One person preparing for dengue, that's good. But a whole community sharing resources, clearing standing water, and protecting their vulnerable neighbors, that creates a compounding level of safety you just can't get alone.
The 2026 El Niño is a highly confident prediction. The science on relative oceanic warming is rock solid. And the cascade of risks to Sri Lanka's health and economy are very, very real. We know it's coming. So the only question left to answer is, what role are you going to play in building a resilient future? How will you step up, use this data, and lead your community? I want you to really think about that as you go forward today. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and keep learning.